think with anything you're trying to communicate effectively to a large amount of people, you kind of just need to like repeat it a lot. Like that's like one of the major things, and that's always a challenge that I think people that are working at larger companies or more traditional companies.
But do you expect as well, like today's traditional companies eventually adopting some form of remote work?
I think remote work is the future of work.
All right, welcome to Scaling Today. This is the podcast where we explore how companies scale and the future of work. I'm your host, Yuying Deng, and today we have a fascinating episode lined up for you. So our guest today is Paul Hadjy. He's the CEO and co-founder of Horangi and also the VP of APEC for Bitdefender as well. And they're both leading companies in the cybersecurity space. So Paul and I actually go way back, at least a couple of years, to the founding of SFL, where Horangi was one of the very first customers that SFL had. So Paul, thank you very much for your confidence in us at that stage. So today, Paul is here to share his insights on remote work. He does have like remote team members in various parts of APAC, so he's really the perfect person to ask about this. I'm excited to dive into Paul's unique approach towards remote work. Welcome to the show, Paul. Would you like to say a few words to our audience?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And excited to be here and just talk a bit about this. It's been sort of a passion for me in terms of trying to figure this out for the past couple of years. But yeah, look forward to talking about it and hopefully adding some value for the listeners.
Okay, fantastic. So to kick things off a bit, could you tell us about your background and how did you actually get started with Horangi?
Yeah, my background. So essentially, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Horangi. We started the company in 2016, and we really started the company around solving cloud security in Asia. So originally I worked for the government in the US, and then subsequently went to a company called Palantir, where I spent 7 years kind of running around the globe. And actually during that time was mostly remote because in the locations that I was in, there wasn't a physical office for most of my career there. And then ended up in Singapore for a couple of years with Palantir and subsequently went to Grab. And at Grab, I was leading the security team and kind of trying to figure out how to sort of solve the cloud security problem at Grab. And this was back in 2016 when cloud was still kind of new. And saw that, given my experience, saw that as an opportunity to start a business around solving that problem. And then when we started Horangi, I was based kind of a split between Singapore and the rest of Southeast Asia, and the TTO was a split between US and Southeast Asia. So that's kind of like where we got the first sort of inclination of kind of being a more remote company. Originally, we had offices in Singapore and Indonesia that were full offices and people would come most of the time, but during COVID, kind of went to distributed as most of us did, and then as we saw the company kind of working and still continuing to be able to operate at an effective level, we decided that post-COVID we weren't going to require people to return to the office, and then took some of the financial benefits of that by having smaller spaces in the locations we're in, and also took the benefits of being able to hire people in more regions and continue to grow the team. And then you mentioned my two titles. So yes, I was the CEO of Horangi, but Horangi was acquired last year by Bitdefender, which is a European cybersecurity firm. And now I'm running APEC for Bitdefender, which is also actually a mostly remote company today. But most of our team is kind of spread across Europe as well as the US. But they also practice remote, which is made the integration between them a little bit easier. Not that it's challenges, but it's easier when both companies are remote, rather than one being not remote.
Yeah, you don't have to introduce like the remote culture to the company that's acquiring you because they've been remote in any case, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it made things a bit easier just because time zones was more difficult in that aspect. But given the fact that everyone is already used to using Zoom and Slack and everything else, it became
And can you give us an idea of how big Bitdefender is, right? In terms of its size and how, because it must be difficult for a larger company to actually have a very distributed kind of workforce.
Yes, so given the acquisition, that now it's around 2,000 people. So Horangi was like a little 120, 130, and then I think Bitdefender was around 1,900, and now a little over 2,000.
Okay, got it. So, for Horangi, I think you mentioned that COVID was one of the big factors, right? So I think two things. First, the founding of the company, because you and your co-founder were remote, and then also COVID inspired you to, keep the remote work going on as well. But did you actually see any benefits in terms of having a remote setup, like or a distributed team setup that kept you going on with this setup, even after it was no longer necessary post-COVID?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few benefits. One, I think from a recruiting perspective, like
Mm,
flexibility is something that not every company provides, and something that I think is an advantage when talking to potential hires.
mm-hmm,
So that's an advantage in terms of attracting people. But there's also the advantage from the employer perspective of being able to hire people in more markets as
mm-hmm,
well, and then allowing them to work together to kind of solve those problems across region. So I think like there's two major advantages on the recruiting side, which is
mm.
better benefit for the employee, and then better benefit for the company in terms of being able to hire people in more region and access to the larger
Okay,
people.
I do remember that Horangi, you really had people in quite a few countries around APEC, at least 2 to 3 countries, correct?
Yeah, I think more. I think at least now we have at least 8 countries around the region, but
Wow.
and then
Okay.
globally it's way more. But now it's a part of Bitdefender. But yeah, with Horangi it was around 8.
Okay, good. So growing the company with a distributed team must come with its own set of challenges, right? So what are some of the biggest obstacles that you faced, and how did you manage to overcome them?
Yeah, I think like one of the biggest obstacles is like communication, right? So like how do you
Mm,
communicate effectively? And I think that's broken down to a couple different things. So one of the things we really focus on hiring for is responsiveness, because
okay.
my belief, whether people believe this incorrect or not, is that like you need to be responsive if you're going to be remote, right?
Hmm.
Because like essentially you don't have the same like can't look in the office and make sure everyone's working. But the way that you kind of understand whether someone is or isn't is like how responsive they are. Obviously, everyone's in meetings and whatnot, but how responsive an individual is and how much they view that as important is really important to us, because we have to be able to communicate effectively,
Yep.
during working hours, but also outside of working hours sometimes, to run our business. And I think that's a key kind of thing that we really focus on. Uh,
Hmm.
then there's like communication of uh, who's in charge of what, and communication of like policies and things like that. And you can be quite sort of explicit and well
Mm,
documented and easy to find.
hmm.
There's quite a few things we've done on that, like obviously using tools like Wiki and Slack to communicate, and then
Yep.
making sure everyone has like uniform sort of Slack defaults, like titles and things like that, just so that
Hmm.
it's quite clear generally like what people are doing. And then
Hmm.
project planning and things like that, making sure that things are documented efficiently,
Hmm.
as well, I think is a key part of being effective there. Yeah, and then the other thing is like I think the biggest thing that the challenge is like the conversations that would happen like ad hoc.
Mm,
And
hmm.
how do you kind of enable those conversations while being remote?
Hmm.
I have like ideas and we've implemented some of them, but like that's I think the thing that has been the hardest one to actually solve is like how do you enable collaboration between people that might not
Mm,
necessarily work together
yep.
on a day-to-day basis. And I think lots of different things we try. We tried this thing called I can't remember the name of the product, but essentially would randomly set you up with like a Zoom call with someone else at the
Mm.
company.
Like a coffee chat kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But online,
Okay.
and then you could like chat with them and just like, hey, like, what do you do? And have five,
Mm,
15 minutes chat like, about who you are and who you can help each other with and that type of thing.
hmm.
And that kind of worked. A lot of different people interacted. Even virtual games sections, like
Hmm.
that was quite powerful as well. Um, but yeah, I think that part's always the struggle is like how do you enable
Hmm.
those interactions that would only happen in an office environment naturally.
Hmm.
Sometimes that is difficult, but not something you can overcome. And like obviously, well, most companies haven't been working remote that long, so I'm
Mm.
sure there's a lot of new innovative solutions that come out with people and making sure companies can be more productive throughout that.
Okay. Have you tried offsites as well? So are there any company policies for offsites?
We do some things around budget for teams. So we
Hmm.
provide like quarterly budget for teams to do an event. it's not like cross company, so to say, but it is teams that are allowed to use that budget in whatever way they see fit with their team, and that budget is given to them quarterly. Which I think works pretty well in a lot of cool events, and you're supposed to like post about it internally so people can like chat about it or get ideas and what else to do. So that seems to work pretty well. But so we have never done a full company offsite since 2019, so since before COVID. So that I think is something that we'll probably invest in again in the future.
Okay. Yeah, we just had a company offsite in, well, not company, but team lead offsite in Malaysia. And, for all the benefits of being a remote company, I think that it really works wonders in terms of like brainstorming and in terms of getting people together as well. So hopefully, I'm pretty sure you have budget for that.
Yes, soon enough.
All right. So another thing, right? So creating a strong company culture, it's something that you alluded to just now. Like, I think it's one of the difficulties that, fully remote companies have. So it can be quite tricky when everyone is remote, right? So how do you keep everyone connected and aligned with your company's vision currently? What are some of the tips or advice that you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think with anything you're trying to communicate effectively to a large amount of people, you kind of just need to like repeat it a lot. Like that's like one of the major things, and it's difficult. It can be annoying from both sides, but like it is
like a broken record.
Yeah. And like, kind of implement it in the things that you do within the company as well. So like Horangi is the Korean word for tiger. So we do a bi-weekly state of the tiger where we talk about like what's going on in the business. Each major function gets to talk about the specific things that are happening in their team. At the end, we do like a fun Horangi work ride where screen Horangi, one person gets randomly nominated to screen Horangi at the end of the call, just so they can kind of it's on Fridays, so at the end of the day, so it gets people like excited about the weekend. Yeah, I think that's like one thing we did that I think worked really well, and like it's always fun to see people screaming at their screen, and sometimes during cafes and stuff. And,
I think I did mention it to you before, Paul, but I find the tiger icon that you guys have like really fascinating, and I'm like seeing it everywhere. In the pendant that you have, like your ring and all that.
Yeah.
And right behind you as well, with the missing end.
Through the artwork that someone did. That was actually for one of the team building things that one of the teams did.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, it looks good. All right. And, another question for you, right? So you have a lot of experience in this, Paul, because I think you've been running Horangi for close to like 7 or 8 years, right? So on and offboarding remote team members can be very challenging, right? So what is your process for bringing new team members on board? And then, when people are leaving for offboarding them, how do you handle things like IT equipment, right? And IT support for all of these people?
Yeah, so I think on the onboarding side, it's a little bit easier. So if we have an office location at where the individual is at, then we try to bring them there. It doesn't always make sense because we do have people in 8 countries, and sometimes it's just one person in one country. So if that's the case, sometimes we'll fly them to Singapore or Indonesia market to do the onboarding in person over basically one day. And then they're kind of like off running, and they have a bunch more calls that happen. But really, we also did something that I think is somewhat unique, which is we only onboard people like once a month. So
once a month, okay.
Yeah, so if you don't start on the first week of the month, essentially, then you won't start until the next month. And the reason we do that is because we put a lot of effort into that onboarding process, right? So when we weren't doing this until maybe 2 years ago was like last time we had classes of like 10 people coming. We'd have like 10 people start on one day. They all get to meet each other, and then through like this cohort together. And the reason I think that's important is because of what I was alluding to earlier with that random meetup, is like people like start with people not inside of their specific team, not like 10 sales people starting or 10 engineers starting. It's like an engineer, salesperson, maybe like a finance person, HR person, all starting on the same day, and they get to go through the different aspects of the company.
Okay.
And then also, they've met some people that they probably wouldn't meet in as a remote company in normal interaction. I think that tends to work pretty well. And then, of course, during COVID, we did it online as well. But it's like a week of onboarding that kind of like details things about.
So everyone basically just flies into Singapore and onboards at the same time as the same cohort.
No. So it depends on where they are. So
Mm,
if let's say you're in like the US, for example, the
mm,
US guy, when we hired him, flew to Singapore and was
mm,
part of an onboarding class
mm.
of people that were in Singapore, right? Same thing in Indonesia. Like we had someone hired in Malaysia, they would go to Indonesia, for example, or Singapore, and
Mm.
kind of go through the hiring process there. And then they would all do the meetings online across the country, right?
Ah, I see, I see. Okay.
Yeah,
So
and
it's
then
like
the physical
done
laptop.
virtually, basically.
Yeah. And then we would give them the physical laptop, of course, if they come to the office. If not, we give it to them with like onboarding pack of like what to do, how to do it.
Mm.
And then the sort of usually some swag stuff too, like shirts
That's
or
nice.
whatever
With the
offering.
tigers and so on.
Yes, with the logo and everything. Yeah.
Okay, okay. And in reverse, like how do you do offboarding for people who are leaving the company?
Yeah, so if they're in near where a major office is, like
Mm,
then they come to the office. But in certain cases that doesn't make sense. So we do it remotely. So we use a lot of software from a security
mm,
perspective that make sure we can like wipe everything if we have to.
mm,
But usually it's done over Zoom, and they go through the process of disabling accounts and
mm,
ensuring everything is done accordingly, and then they sign paperwork that says like I've done everything effectively
mm,
as to the way like Travis has to do it. And
mm,
yeah, this is part of the offboarding. And then I think that stuff's compounded a bit just because we're a security company, but
mm,
as companies get bigger, like that process becomes more serious.
for
um,
sure.
but yeah, like, and then we have a setup where the laptop gets shipped back to where we want to ship it to.
Mm.
And do all that
Okay.
stuff. Yeah.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. And to your area of expertise, right? I think that IT security is definitely a big concern for many companies with distributed teams. So, how do you ensure that your IT environment is safe, that it's compliant, right? Are there any specific tools or methods that you actually rely on?
Yeah, well, now being part of a much bigger security company, we use
Mm,
our own security software
mm,
for endpoints,
mm,
as well as management of the different pieces of infrastructure that are being used. And
mhm,
so Bitdefender, we use our own endpoint and also our own like MDR, which is a 24/7 security
mhm,
operations center that monitors our infrastructure. But yeah, like that's a big part of a remote team that's really important is making sure that your employees' interaction with the company are secure.
mhm,
So whether that's like endpoint security or that like VPNs or
mhm,
whatever's necessary for your business is a key part of that. And like single sign-on, all these things that are sort of protect our authentication, our investment in making
mhm,
sure that they're smooth kind of being remote. And I wouldn't say the challenges are harder, but they're different
mhm,
from a traditional organization that has a network at the office.
mhm,
But especially the security challenges, I don't think are insurmountable.
mhm,
Especially because and you have your employees are going to have a different level of responsibility when they're not with their own hardware.
mhm,
And you need to take precautions around being able to remotely wipe computers, remotely wipe their access, or remotely remove their access information,
mhm,
and containerizing specific things like email on phones if you don't know the phone.
mhm.
Those types of things are really important, but it depends on the threat level of your business. So if you're not a security company or not in the financial industry, you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
maybe be a bit more lax, but as you grow, it becomes more and more serious because of your customer base and all those
Yeah,
things. I think.
yeah, I'm
Um,
sure. And you also had experience in Grab, right? Which also had like distributed teams all around the place as well.
Yeah. When I was there, it wasn't necessarily remote, but there were people distributed
Mm,
everywhere. Yeah, and I think that was challenging too. And like, I ran security, but also ran
mm,
IT, and like there was a lot of like difficulties there because like IT, of course, wanted to standardize hardware, but
mm,
we had like conflicts with like different countries because some country would say like, oh, like I don't want to spend that much in hardware because it comes
mhm.
out of my budget. So like, there's a lot of challenges I think like
Yeah.
internally, in terms of like making these efficient, but then also like considering cost and how cost can be attributed within that business. So
Mhm,
that's always a challenge that I think people that are working at larger companies or more traditional companies that they go through kind of moving to a more remote friendly work environment that you'll face.
mhm,
But in the end of the day, I think remote work is the future of work.
mhm,
And a good portion of companies will continue to be remote for the foreseeable
Yeah.
future. And I think more and more of them will allow it, even if there's some requirements involved, which I think is depending on the business, but some of that may be required. So I think it's all fair and part of the job that the individuals do.
And I think, Paul, that segues very nicely into my next question, which is basically, where do you see the future of remote work going, right? You see it, you just mentioned that you see it becoming more mainstream, but do you expect as well, like today's traditional companies, eventually adopting some form of remote work?
Yeah, I mean, for sure they will. I think to be competitive in certain spaces, especially, like it's already probably more common than not, I would say, especially in tech. And I think like functions like customer support and things like that for even more traditional companies are being run out of people's phones. And I think that's a good thing for many different reasons. It gives the companies more access to talent and the people more access to opportunities as well. And I think that's quite a good thing. Again, like I think there's challenges, and like managing people remotely is like a skill that may not necessarily be something that someone who comes from a more traditional environment will be comfortable with. But I mean, it takes time, and companies are run differently too, right? Like you run much more on metrics into the outcomes based rather than like clocking in and clocking out, right? And I think that can make a more efficient company in certain spaces. It may make a less efficient company in other spaces, right? But in reality, I think like definitely specific industries will be more remote than not over the foreseeable future, and I think that will continue to happen. And like, I mean, some executives don't like it, right? And like they're selecting a certain type of person that wants to work at that business, and that's okay too, right? So like, yeah. So I think it'll. Yeah, I'd be curious. Like, I actually don't know where the numbers are at in terms of how many employees are remote versus how many employees like actually have to work in the office. But I'm sure you might. But like, I can imagine that percentage continuing to grow like year over year, and to a point where at some point it's probably like 50-50. But I don't think it's there yet. Probably, I would guess.
It's probably about 20+% right now for like full remote.
Yeah, which is probably like triple what it was 5 years ago. So
yeah, for sure,
or more. So I think that's telling us something. So 50%, I think, is not out of the 2030 timeline.
Yeah. I mean, for those that are hybrid, like the percentage is even higher. I think, for all companies that are hybrid or remote, is like close to 60-70% now. Yeah, so
Wow,
definitely interesting. I agree with you, like on where remote work is going. All right. So today we have learned a lot about, Paul's take on like the challenges of growing remote teams and also like his experience in having done so as well. And, I think we all, when we have IT security problems, remote work, we all know whom to go to. So Paul will be there for us. Paul, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners about scaling a distributed team?
No, that's it. I think it was an interesting podcast, and happy to be on here. And yeah, like look forward to seeing everyone out in the remote workspace.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Paul. Thanks for joining us today. Where can our listeners find you? Like, is there any Twitter link that you use or any LinkedIn?
Yeah, definitely LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Paul Hadjy on LinkedIn, so you should be able to find me. But I'll share the link with you after this, and then you can post it on the article.
Yep, we'll post it as well. All right. Thanks, Paul.